Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Heather Buck. I'm your Lane County Commissioner for District 5. I will be your moderator this evening. Thank you. So thank you very much, and I'm going to pass it over to Senator Manning to start the evening out.
Testing. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming out. I am Senator James Manning. My district is North and West Eugene, up to and including Junction City. I am on the Senate Judiciary Committee. I am on the Joint Committee on Ways and Means. I co-chair the Joint Committee Ways and Means Subcommittee on Transportation Economic Development. Also, the Joint Committee Ways and Means Public Safety Committee. I am a member of the Senate Special Conduct Committee. Yeah. So some of you may be aware that we met on Monday, some of the issues that we talked about. But I am really honored to be here with my colleagues. For me, it was an eye-opening experience because there were some things that were done and said that I never expected out of a state legislature. But we held together, and in conjunction with working with the House, we got a lot of good bills done. So I won't stand up here and talk very much more, but I want to pass it off to my good friend and colleague, Senator Beyer, who reminds me every day, a wise man once said, nothing.
Actually, he said that, and I just remind him of it every day. He's saying we don't want to talk a lot, we just want to get the work done. I'm Beyer, state senator from District 6, which is, actually it includes everything, I guess it would be east of the Amazon Parkway in Eugene, and then most of the rest of the western or eastern side of Lane County and all of Lynn County from the river all the way up to almost Highway 34. So a little bit of geography, lots of cows and sheep and stuff like that. I would say I've been in a number of sessions now, and this was probably the hardest, but I also think the most successful session we've ever had. We passed the school funding bill. You've all known that. The largest increase in school funding in Oregon's history. Governors since Governor Hatfield, every single governor and every single legislature since then in 50 years have tried to do that. We got it done. Now just you have to help us keep it in place because it'll probably be on the ballot in November. I serve on 4 or 5 committees. I serve on the Ways and Means Committee and chair the committee on the Ways and Means Committee on Health and Human Services. I also serve on the Health Committee. I serve on the I co-chair the Transportation Committee, and I'm also on the Carbon Committee. Was on the Carbon Committee, or Clean Energy Jobs Committee. So a lot of stuff, a lot of meetings. It was probably the most exhausting session I've been in. A lot of things done. Most of my attention, as you might expect, was trying to figure out how to keep things funded in the healthcare and in the human services area. I was very concerned coming into the session before we got the forecast that our human service system, we would have a name only, but because of the lack of funding, we wouldn't have people deliver services. I'm happy to say that we didn't completely do what I'd like to do, but I think we kept it in place and people will be served. One of the big things in that also was child welfare. We've put a strategy in place and put some additional funding in there to try and take care of kids that are in foster care and turn that thing around. It's a hard job. We'll see how that plays out. On the healthcare system, most important thing that I think we did was we kept the health plan funded. You should all be proud that Oregon is one of the states that has better than 94% of our Oregonians covered with health insurance of one kind or another. The real problem The real problem in healthcare is that for those who have employer paid or single, they pay their own insurance. The problem is too many Oregonians are in a situation where they have insurance that they can't afford to use. We have to do something about that. We tried to. We're looking at ways to make pharmacy drugs more affordable, keep their lid on that. We have a program in place that we put there with the Health Policy Board to hold costs down in the future, and there's a lot of work we have to do there. One of the things we do that Senator Manning was a sponsor of was Senate Bill 770, which is a strategy to put in place the how do we get single payer involved in Oregon. We'll see if we can do that. And with that, I'll stop.
Hi everyone, I'm Julie Fahey. I represent House District 14, which is some of Churchill, all of Bethel, a little corner of River Road, Santa Clara west of River Road, and then on up to the county line, including Junction City. I'm serving in my second term, and this year my main committee assignments were the Student Success Committee, and Representative Nathanson and Lively are going to talk a little bit more about that bill. So I was on that committee and went on the tour last year, and then I co-chaired the Accountability and Transparency Subcommittee of that committee to make sure that the money is going to be spent in a way that's accountable and transparent to the public. I also served on the Business and Labor Committee with Rep. Holvey, and the Economic Development Committee. I was the vice chair of that committee with Rep. Lively as the chair. And then I served on the Capital Culture Committee, which was charged with making recommendations on how we change our processes and our culture in the Capitol to deal with issues of harassment. So a lot of big, weighty things this session, and we all sort of were charged with talking about one of the big things of the session, and I'm going to talk about housing. So in 3 minutes, there's a lot of housing, and I tend to think about the housing crisis in Oregon. At one time, someone once told me that, the saying, death by 1,000 cuts. Well, the only way we're going to solve the housing crisis is 1,000 Band-Aids. And so I organize the solutions into 4 different categories. One is tenant protections. The second is increasing the supply of housing. The third is funding for programs that keep people out of homelessness, enable homeownership, and help get our homeless back into housing. And then the third is funding and bonding for the construction and the preservation of affordable low-income housing. So we did a lot in each of those 4 areas. I'm going to try and do the summaries. So in tenant protections, we passed Senate Bill 608, which established the first statewide anti-rent gouging provision in the entire country, limiting rent increases to 7% plus inflation. It also placed limits on the use of no-cause evictions. So those are very important things to keep people stable and in their homes. We also passed House Bill 2006, which is $3 million of funding to provide survivors of domestic violence with housing services and other resources for renters. One of the big issues that I worked on this session was increasing the supply of housing. And there's a bill, House Bill 2001, which passed on the final day of the session, which is somewhat controversial, but I was a strong supporter of it. It re-legalized middle housing in areas of single-family zoning in cities across the state. So duplexes, triplexes, townhomes. We also passed bills that will help with the development of housing production and provide funding for cities to develop strategies to meet their housing needs, funding for housing preservation, for funding for programs. So the 2 of the primary programs that we fund at the state level are Emergency Housing Assistance, which is EHA, and SHAP, which is the State Homelessness Assistance Program. We provided about $50 million in funding for those programs this year, which is a significant increase over the last biennium. I'm getting the red folder back there. So the last thing I just want to say, that's the time limit. So the red card. So permanent supported housing, $50 million in bonding for permanent supported housing to help end chronic homelessness, $150 million in bonding for the LIFT program, which is the program for affordable housing development, low-income housing development, publicly subsidized, $25 million in bonding for affordable housing and manufactured home park preservation. And then really quickly, because I have so many mobile home parks in my district, we passed an important bill on preserving mobile home parks and another important bill on requiring mediation of conflicts that arise between park tenants and park owners as a way to help enforce landlord-tenant law in mobile home parks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nancy Nathanson. Thank you. I represent House District 13, which includes this place right here. It's most of North Eugene and downtown. Wow, what a session. Historic, unprecedented, difficult, but some amazing landmark legislation, reducing diesel emissions, setting up a statewide paid family and medical leave program supported by both businesses and workers, ending mandatory minimum sentences for juveniles facing serious charges, and the Student Success Act. I'm going to say more about that in a minute. Oil train safety requirements, regulating wake boats that were damaging private property and damaging river habitat. We ended most automatic handing out of most single-use plastic bags and single-use plastic straws. And we are sending to voters two measures that I strongly support: removing the constitutional prohibition on those large campaign donations, the really big political contributions, and two, increasing the tobacco tax and putting an end to untaxed vaping, which we know is needed to stop the alarming increase in youth use of nicotine. So after many years of working on the state budget, on the spending side, I was moved to be chair of House Revenue Committee, and I was also given the task of co-chairing a joint committee with Senator Hass. We were charged with the assignment of coming up with some kind of significant new revenue, and we did. So finally, after 30 years of disinvestment and declining revenues for education, we finally are going to get things back on track, and we have a new stable revenue source. We did this through a new tax on business, a commercial activities tax. It's similar to one used in Washington, Texas, and Ohio. It goes to a fund dedicated exactly and completely, entirely to education. More than $1 billion a year. It's a very low tax rate, just a little over 0.5%, but spread very broadly across all industry sectors. It is progressive. It exempts groceries and gas, motor fuel. It's also progressive because it exempts small business. The first $1 million of commercial activities is exempt. That means that nearly 90% of Oregon's businesses won't even pay a single dollar in this new tax. And all Oregonians are going to benefit from a personal income tax rate reduction, which will be centered primarily and focused on low and middle income Oregonians. So, my top two priority bills passed: combating the spread of infectious disease. Y'all remember 3 people died of scabies in Eugene a few years ago. That should never happen. I passed a bill that's going to address that. And also, I passed one to protect 14,000 vulnerable Oregonians who have guardians appointed for them. Guardians have sweeping authorities, can take away your rights, and I passed a bill that says no more can you limit someone's access to your loved one without at least some judicial review. Guardians can't do that anymore. So, we passed some wonderful budgets also. I'm hoping that my colleague, Representative Holvey, will tell you about some of the remarkable investments we made.
Thank you. Paul Holvey, State Representative from District 8, which is South Eugene, 11th Street South generally, except for a little bit of Churchill, and then go out to Walton, Lorraine, and down to the county line at Douglas County. Elmira as well. Yes, Elmira. Walton, no tie, you know. I'll go back to what Senator Beyer said. This was one of the most productive, but also one of the most challenging and most stressful sessions I've been in the time I've been in the legislature, which is, I stopped counting. So, but it was something to behold, I think. We faced some really major challenges, whether it was just the challenges of our democratic institution or whether it was just the tough bills that we were dealing with. And so we did some great work. I just got to say, I chair the Rules Committee. I'm also the co-chair of the Capital Construction Committee, which does the bonding and the projects that people have alluded to. And so, and those are big issues. Served on the Business and Labor Committee. Mostly in the first half of the session. In the last half, I was sort of off and on as such because I was just so busy with the end of session. And as well, I serve as Speaker Pro Tem, so I was in charge of helping out with the agenda of the House and making sure that our agenda got done in a timely manner, which was difficult, to say the least. And of course we were always watching the Senate, you know, as kind of screwed up my last week of June, but but I will say I spent a lot of time over the last 6 years on paid family leave. I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. You know, it's an insurance plan, and employees put into it. Employers with more than 25 employees pay into it. For employers that are under 25, they don't have to pay into it, which was something we recognized was really critical to get this legislation passed, to be sensitive to small business and how they could or could not participate. The real key is this, that even if the employers that are less than 25 don't participate, their employees do and have access to that program. So this covers all employees. This is just really a monumental, one of the monumental things we've done this session is this particular program. No longer will people, even though we have the Family Leave Act, most employees that don't make a lot of money can't afford to use that because they have to pay the bills. They have to put food on the table. And so having that paid insurance program for them for 12 weeks is just, you know, it's monumental. I think it's going to set the stage across the country. And the way we put it together, we got good business support because we worked out the details. And it wasn't, a lot of people here worked on it in different committees. It ended up going through the Rules Committee, and weirdly enough, it went to the Capital Construction Subcommittee when it went to Ways and Means, and which I chaired both of those committees, so it was, you know, my role is basically a shepherd to get things done. So I really feel proud about that particular legislation. It's going to help working people so much. So we also passed the national popular vote. That also came through the Rules Committee, obviously, along with a great bill on transparency around independent expenditures. House Bill 2983 is really going to help identify where the big money is playing and try to identify who are the donors to those particular PACs that are playing in those what has been sort of dark money. Not sort of, is dark money. And so we're really trying to expose dark money with that bill, a great bill. Along with Representative Nathanson also had a bill. I got to give a shout out. There was a couple of bills around making sure we identify who's putting the ads out, you know, who's paying for those ads. So there's a couple of bills that did that as well. One from Nancy, one from Representative Rayfield out of Corvallis, who really was, I worked closely with all session on campaign finance reform. We did send SJR 18 to the voters I think Nancy alluded to that, a really big deal. We're going to put to the voters to make sure that we can put campaign finance limits in place. We had a bill on the House side, didn't get through the Senate, that actually had hard numbers for those limits, but I'm sure we'll come back to that. I've got the red card right now. I could go on for a little bit longer, but I just appreciate everybody there. I know it was a very difficult session. Student success and what student success did with revenue is a game changer. I got to say, we now have a third leg to the stool in our taxation, which is so critical for keeping services across the state, especially since this one's dedicated to education. We are poised to turn the corner on education in this state and start funding it. So.
I'll use my own, so I wasn't sure it was on either. So, my name is John Lively. I'm state representative from House District 12, which is essentially the city of Springfield. So this session, thank you. This session I spent most of my time, I was chair of the economic development that Julie and I served on that committee, and we did a lot with booze and marijuana. We spent a lot of time with booze and marijuana. We all learned a lot about booze and marijuana. Yeah. But then I also served on the Joint Carbon Reduction Committee, and I served on the Joint Student Success Committee, both of which took a lot of time, were very complex issues, and I enjoyed serving on them. But what I'm going to do in the 3, 4, 5 minutes, whatever it is, Paul, that you used, I'm going to talk about the Joint Student Success and what that program will actually do. Because Nancy and others talked about the fact that it'll, in a biennium, raise $2 billion or $1 billion a year for education, and that's divided up. So one of the big parts of that hasn't been part of our total education focus before is early learning, and so early learning and early childhood, out of that $2 billion is dedicated $400 million a biennium to start addressing, and the goal there is really to expand programs. We have a good network in place and we have some good programs, but it serves far fewer children than need to be served in this state, and so the goal that we took when we did that was to start serving more. Obviously it won't serve them all, but it will. But three key things from that. One, we are able to fully fund early intervention, early childhood special education programs. We've had it's a critical piece. We've had doing a better and better job identifying the need, putting the children in those programs, but we've never had the funds to provide the services they do. We know if we provide the services early, they do much better, they're more successful later. So we fully funded that particular program, which is going to be very helpful. We also increased the funding and the opportunities for more relief nurseries in the state, another program that deals with trauma and early childhood that helps children be successful. And again, an example that works, and it leverages a lot of private funds, so there was more funds there. And then the other things, early pre-kindergarten, early Head Start, so programs that are already in place, we provided more slots to be able to do that. And then we also increased the funding to help educate more professionals, well, not to educate, but also to help them gain credentials in that so they can work up the ladder from a standpoint of pay, because pay is an issue. A lot of people spend a lot of time in early education and don't get paid very well, so part of the goal is to increase that. So that's the early education, early learning part. So the other part of the money goes to the school investment and the school improvement fund. So the school improvement fund's $1 billion. And so how that fund works, every school district is eligible for those funds, but it'll be based on them applying for putting together a plan to address specific areas, and the plans may be different in different school districts, but we've outlined the areas are. So we haven't said you have to spend it this way, but you have to be able to show improvement. And so mental and behavioral health, more health professionals, more learning time, smaller class sizes, more arts and music, summer learning, before and after school programs. So those are examples of things that districts can put together a plan, submit the plan for financing, and get financed, we call them grants, through this program, and then they'll be held accountable for achieving certain goals doing that to show that indeed we're making progress, and if they're not, they'll be provided some assistance and help how we might alter the plan or what we can do to be sure to do that. The other part of it is the statewide investments, and so this will go to all school districts based on the formula with a higher award for poverty, so there will be an increase in these awards for those school districts that have high rates of poverty. Universal meals, fully funding Measure 98, bullying and suicide prevention, dropout prevention, student success teams, and support for students with disabilities. So I think we're all excited about the opportunity to start making these investments, and all I encourage people is it isn't going to change overnight, but if we stay the course, I think we'll start seeing a lot of what we want to see and help our schools be successful. So thank you.
Yes, let's give a big round of applause for all the hard work that they've been doing the last 6 months on all these bills. Thank you. This is just a reminder, if you came in a little late and you want to ask a question, there are cards in the back, and you can put them on there and hold them up, and they'll come and grab them. And I would be remiss not to also mention that Commissioner Burney from Springfield wanted to be here to represent Springfield with you, but he's traveling on county economic development work. So I'm going to start reading these. Thank you for being legible. First question is, what happened to patient reform and protections from the OCC and legislators? Who will help our most vulnerable? Who would like to take that question? OCC. So, what happened to patient reform and protections from the OCC and legislators? Who will help our most vulnerable?
It's a medical cannabis question.
Medical cannabis. So let me just make a couple comments about that. So very little, if anything, happened regarding medical cannabis this time. The committee, we had a lot of issues just dealing with the legalization and what needs to change or not. And frankly, all of us on the committee, except Julie and Representative Helm, didn't serve on the joint committee board that put these together. So what we identified, though, there's several needs as far as medical marijuana. And one of those needs is to make the decision in this state, is there going to be two separate systems or is there going to be one system? And we didn't get that done, but we have a work group that's going to be working on that between now and the short session to decide. And then secondly, how to assure the product is available as the product's been available in the past to get them to. So there's several issues there, but honestly, we didn't even delve into medical marijuana at this point, but it's at the top of our list to do going into the short session.
Hello? Okay. After this last session's failure to pass meaningful climate plan, what are the possibilities for addressing this? How will you bring rural Oregon on board with a plan that can work?
That's a really good question. I thought, and I think I probably said, some of you have heard me say that this was the session we were going to pass it. Unfortunately, we got very close, but at the very end, I think if we had had maybe another week and didn't decide to go after coyotes hunts in the Senate, we probably wouldn't have had a Senate walkout of the Republicans and maybe would have gotten to the issue. But that's really what killed it in the end. The major concern that we ran into was people in rural areas particularly concerned about their ability to continue to be able to move about at an affordable way because of the price of gasoline. That was their fear. And it was particularly true of the farming community, which uses a lot of fuels and doesn't have really many alternatives, as well as the logging community. You may have seen in the news, one day we had log trucks and dump trucks and every other tractors circling the Capitol for about 8 hours going around. So I think those are the issues. There are some answers to that, and I don't think any of us are willing to give up on that. We're going to work on it. You've seen in the papers and the media that the governor says she's going to try and pull a group together and is looking at executive action to do that. I'm frankly a little skeptical that she has that tool. Governor Inslee in Washington tried to do it, and the courts in Washington told him twice he didn't have that authority. But I think where it emanates from is a provision that the Obama administration used under the Clean Air Act to say that you could regulate greenhouse gas emissions. So I think that's probably the basis of it. We're going to keep working on it. We're not going to give up for the very simple reason it's probably the most important issue facing humankind today.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of things. I mean, first of all, I'll just say I think we're all very disappointed. I think maybe everyone on this dais predicted that this would be the session that we would actually get it done, and we were on a path to finish it. And it was, I mean, obviously the most disappointing thing of the whole session for me. So we're taking a little bit of time to regroup and trying to figure out what the next steps are in terms of how do we move forward, how do we actually take meaningful action on climate, and soon, because, you know, our climate fate will be sealed by the year 2030. And so the question, the last part of the question is the part I wanted to speak to, which is about addressing the concerns of rural Oregon. And I think we built this monumental coalition, Renew Oregon, and all the different environmental organizations that were doing such great work. And I'm Monday morning quarterbacking a little bit here, but they did an amazing job of mobilizing the supporters of this legislation, the people who are convinced that we need to take action on climate change and that Oregon as a state needs to take action. What I think generally we collectively didn't do as good of a job in is talking to folks in rural Oregon about the fact that we are already experiencing the impacts of climate change. And the impacts of climate change are going to hurt them the most. So we're looking at, you know, more severe droughts, more severe wildfires, changing weather patterns that are going to affect agriculture, you know, sudden oak death in our Doug firs, especially on the coast, that's going to get more severe with the changing in weather. And so, you know, we either need to take proactive action to sort of prevent some of those and mitigate some of those impacts, or we're going to pay the costs. And so, you know, I just think furthering conversation with rural Oregon about, you know, here are the challenges that we face. Here's the problems that we see that Oregon is going to need to solve because climate change is happening. And what are the solutions that we can all support, rural, urban, suburban, small town, to actually get there? So that's what I would say is that we're really thinking about that communication strategy of how do we move forward.
Just a couple of things to add on to that. While we didn't get the cap and trade bill done, it's not like we didn't do anything. We passed a number of smaller efforts, everything from mandating the state government, when it buys and replaces vehicles, 25% of them have to be zero-emission vehicles each year. To add into that, it specifically set goals for monitoring. We've had goals in the past for achieving a change in the vehicle fleet, but we've never had a way to monitor that. So we've directed the Department of Energy to specifically do that and make recommendations to the legislature in the future. And you need to understand that if you're looking at really making significant changes in climate issues, it's all about cars. We have done in most states the two biggest sources of pollution. In fact, it's about 90% of it is electrical generation, which Oregon has done a very good job of moving away from that. There's still some things we have to do, but we're on a path to fix that. And the other one's cars, which we haven't done a very good job of. We do have a small program, part of the Transportation Act in 2017, that subsidizes up to about 8,000 cars a year, electrical. It's a small piece. Our problem is that our tax laws and our Constitution in Oregon doesn't allow us to use any of the transportation funds for anything but roads. Most other states that are making more progress than that have more flexibility to that. We've also done changes in the utility laws to allow the utilities, the big utilities, to get involved directly in building out the electrification infrastructure so that you can actually charge your car if you get it, and promoting more efficient use of other zero-emission vehicles, whether hydrogen if it comes along. I don't know about that, but trying to make some direction on that. And we reinstituted a small solar program that I think Hovey was involved in putting back together again, subsidy program. So we've done some stuff.
All right, next question. Please tell us how we can help the commission in SB 770 to be a success.
Healthcare is a human right, and I firmly believe that, and all of my colleagues up here they also believe that. I want to give a shout out to Representative Hovey that was chairing the, which committee was that? Yeah, that's the one. I approached him. I said, I really want this bill. He's also a co-signing sponsor of this bill too, and he was like, okay, I got you. I didn't worry about anything about this bill passing. This bill was a product of years in the making. A lot of people, a lot of you sitting out there have had part in the design of this. Now, originally, just to make a correction, it was supposed to be a commission. One of the problems that we ran into on the House side with our co-chairs of the full committee is that they figured that a commission would be too expensive. So they asked me if I would make it, turn it into a task force, because a task force is less expensive and it doesn't mean that it's ongoing. I see Charlie sitting out there. Charlie, stand up. I got to tell you, Charlie and I got to know each other very well. Seemingly daily, we had an amazing staff member, Adrian Uphoff, that worked with Charlie and Charles and Tom and a whole host of other people to get this thing together. The process was amazing. I brought this in 2017. We tried to push this bill through and it didn't make it. I think we had something like 35 or 32 legislators that signed onto it. This time we had over 48. 48, there's 90 legislators in the building. That's half. So we knew that this bill was going to move. And it also helps when you have strong Lane County delegates that are in position to move these bills, which you have here. Lane County, you should be very happy with your delegation, because this group up here moved a lot of high priority bills, and 770 was one of those bills moving forward. Now, Representative Salinas also had a bill that was combined with 770, which is a different add-on because it opens up the door to a single payer, which wasn't a part of 770 in its original design. So now, the way it's going to work, and I'll have to talk with you one-on-one or in a different group because I love this bill, and I want to thank everyone. Julie and Rep. Nose carried the bill on the House side, and you got to go back and listen to their floor carries. It was very passionate. It was spot on, and I was really so proud. When it came to the Senate, for us to do it, we were like crunch time. It was one of the last bills, so the only thing that I can do was stand up and say, it's a good bill, should pass. And it did.
How can we protect the Student Success Act funding?
Yes, first, don't sign the petition. Thank you, Senator Beyer. Seriously, last night I was part of a telephone meeting and learning about a very aggressive signature gathering campaign in Klamath County. And the people gathering the signatures are saying things like, you don't want this sales tax, you don't want this gross receipts tax. Well, guess what? I'm one of the chief authors of this bill. I know what it is. It is not Measure 97, it is not at 67, and it is not a gross receipts tax. It is a modified type of gross receipts tax, but it is a sort of a commercial activities tax. But we also did things that business had been talking about to accommodate businesses. They can take a 35% subtraction of some of their costs. Their costs costs of inputs or costs of labor. And there are some other modifications to it. It's not true that it's a pass-through sales tax. It's not true that it's a gross receipts tax. So the campaign, the signature gathering is already happening. We already know that people are talking about it in a way that is not entirely truthful. So one thing you can do is contact friends around the state. If you hear reports that these signatures are going, campaigns are happening, we'd like a copy. You know, it's pretty easy to take a picture of something with your phone, right? We'd like to see what it really is, because you're allowed to collect signatures on one kind of petition, but not on another kind of piece of papers that you don't have permission to circulate. And that's a very important point. We'd like to see what people are being asked to sign, and we'd like to hear what they're being told, because we need to stop the inaccuracies. I'm hoping that some of the social media campaigns that have already been started to support the Student Success Act will be effective and will influence people to continue to support it, not sign the petition, and that there will not ultimately need to be a referendum. If Oregonians support what the legislature did, because this is a landmark investment turning around 30 years of disinvestment, and not only is it a very low rate tax, spread very broadly across business, it's progressive, and it includes a personal income tax rate reduction. It's really an excellent plan. I hope Oregonians will support it and not sign the petitions.
I'll just say I was trying to look to see what the deadline is, but they have to collect about 75,000 signatures in the next couple of months. I don't know what the exact deadline is, so don't sign the petition. If it does get on the ballot, the election will be in January. So we'll be, looking for opportunities. If you're interested in getting involved in defending it, there will be opportunities to get involved in the campaign. So that's it. The election will be in January. It's similar to Measure 101. I don't know if you remember, last year we had the healthcare funding for the Oregon Health Plan. That was a special election in January. And so we set the election date, it's January. The legislature passed a bill to do that, because if the funding is overturned, then it puts a significant hole in our 2-year budget. And so we really need to know that sooner rather than waiting until November of next year, because if we wait until November, then we're already about 70% through the biennium, and it's really hard to make up that funding gap. So if we know it sooner in the 2-year budget period, then we'll be able to make adjustments if it does fail. So.
Okay, what is being done for homeless program for people right now?
All right, I put away my notes on this, but I get to talk more about housing and homelessness. So that is very exciting, because I skipped over most of my notes in my early introduction. So I touched a little bit on this in my opening, but the two big programs that provide assistance for people who are in danger of losing their homes or who are homeless and are on a path out of that to being housed are EHA and SHAP. And so we allocated about $50 million, 45 of which will go to EHA and SHAP, and $5 million will be awarded to strengthen the state's homeless shelter network. So the state's role, I guess I should take a step back. The state's role primarily in the issue of our unhoused population is generally to provide funding. The cities and the counties are the ones that actually implement these programs, that do the work on the ground of making sure that people have access to the resources that they need, that there are, sufficient housing options and shelter options available. The state's role primarily is funding. So that's kind of why when I went through my notes of here's what we're doing about homelessness at the state level, it's primarily dollar amounts. So keep that in mind. So EHA and SHAP funding, we also put through almost $15 million in federal funding to provide housing services for families receiving temporary assistance for needy families to prevent or address homelessness or housing instability for families with children. And then I referenced this again in my opening, but permanent supportive housing, $50 million in bonding and about $3 million in general fund dollars to provide permanent supportive housing, affordable housing with support services to end chronic homelessness. So that's I've got a whole other, long list of funding and what specific programs we're funding, but that's the big picture. The state's general role is to provide money so that the cities and counties can actually implement some of these things.
I'd like to add one other thing. With our continued increasing investment in mental health treatment and wraparound services, there is increasing emphasis on wraparound services, treating the whole person if someone's hungry and homeless and needs help with mental health or addictions or some other health problem. A lot of the programs now are being structured so that agencies need to work among each other. Local governments and local programs will need to work with other programs so that there is even increasing attention paid to if there are housing problems. Someone who has no permanent shelter is also not able to protect their valuables. They can't protect their medication. They have no means of transportation to get more. So we're looking at how the services need to be connected. So I'd say that in addition to homelessness, we are also ramping up our efforts to connect housing, transportation, mental health, et cetera, and food security.
Could the state do more to advertise EV tax credits?
Good point. Undo less. First, we would have to have more EV tax credits to do that. As I said before, we've got about enough to do. Depends on the kind of cars people buy. Somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 cars a year under the privilege tax was part of before. That program actually is getting pretty good use now. Now if we could just find some force to add some more to it. One of the things that I hope comes out of the bill that I talked about before with the EV and all that is more focus on and more advertisement and education to get people to do more of that, to buy more of that. But right now, I mean, even if we did more of that, we just don't have the funding to do it at this point.
Why do legislators so often use the emergency clause on bills that strip and limit/restrict citizens' rights?
The emergency clause is something that people obviously a lot don't understand. Mostly what you hear is that the legislature puts on the emergency clause so that voters can't get at the issue quickly, and frankly, that does happen sometimes. But mostly the emergency clause is put on by the Legislative Council, and we spend a lot of time over the last couple of sessions as legislators taking them off. When they go on, it's usually because it needs to be done to tie into a change in federal law or some other phenomena that's happening. You got to start, once you pass the legislation and it's signed, you have to get the administrative rules in place so that people can make that change. And you need that provision in there to do that. But we are, as a group, as legislators, trying to reduce that. And it's just a trend. I don't know why. It's a trend that's happened. When I first was in the legislature in the 90s, we didn't have as many emergency clauses. But I don't believe it's because legislators are asking for emergency clauses in most cases. They just come back from our attorneys that way.
Speak to that just for a second. Is it on? Yeah. The emergency clause is always a controversial topic, and some people just totally resent it. But the reality is, as Senator Beyer was alluding to, is Legislative Council puts that on sometimes because we have, for whatever reason, there's implementation dates, and without an emergency clause, your agencies can't start doing the rulemaking or preparing for the implementation date. And so that sets everything back so far that it will take years for a particular piece of legislation to go into effect. And so that is another use of the emergency clause that's really pretty critical. And it happens a lot on a lot of different bills, and people just argue about it here and there. I know people were really upset about the Student Success Act and a few others about the use of the emergency clause. It didn't have one. But people thought it did, and they wanted to refer this, and they wanted to refer just lots of things. And the fact is the people still have the right to an initiative, and to bring something forward as well. So, I just gotta, say that there's a lot of issues that come up that really require us to do things much more quickly. And that's what the emergency clause is for. Otherwise, our agencies have to sit back and wait for challenges before they can do their work.
So I'll just add a couple of things to that. So one, the Rep. Holvey touched on a point, which is that the general purpose of the emergency clause is so that the bill can go into effect sooner. That is the point of the emergency clause. For a variety of reasons, sometimes those get put on. The second point that Senator Beyer talked about is that we don't actually write every word of the bills. That is done by what we call legislative counsel, which is a team of lawyers that draft the bills. And I request a bill about such and such a topic, it comes back. Often it has an emergency clause on it. And I will tell you the culture in the building right now is unless that emergency clause is absolutely needed, most legislators will go back to legislative counsel and say, take that out, please. And the final thing I'll just say about emergency clauses is every bill can be put to the voters. A bill that has an emergency clause on it, it does not mean that there can't be a ballot measure about that bill. It's the difference is whether it's a referendum or an initiative. So it's just different processes to put it on the ballot. So a bill that passes with an emergency clause, if there is a group of an organization or a group of citizens that want to put that on the ballot, you can still do that. It's just a different process from the referendum process.
Thank you. Just kind of tag team off of what you already heard. The emergency clause, if you look at it from the fiscal portion that I have, one is how we get Senate Bill 770 up and running. It's on a timetable, and it's important in order to provide funding that begins the 1st of July because it's on a timetable. So sometimes, often, that it's dealing with a timetable. How do we get more money for emergency housing? That would probably require an emergency clause. So from a fiscal standpoint, it's really important. Again, like my colleagues have said, it doesn't stop anyone, any citizen, from initiating a initiative petition if you choose to do so. That is one of those false norms that's out there saying that the legislators do this to kind of push through things behind citizens and they don't get a voice in there. That's not true.
You might not want to sit down. Can Boquist be impeached? Repercussions for MIA Republicans. That was the first question. The second one was repercussions for MIA Republicans.
Okay. All right. For first is that being on special conduct committee, we went through one phase. There is an inquiry or an investigation that's going on based off of the words that Senator Boquist spoke. And if you are familiar with his speech, what he said, you can review it on OLIS, and they continue to loop it on social media. Send bachelors and make sure they're heavily armed. And that also had incited a group of people that made statements that caused a lot of alarm. What we're talking about is a safe workplace, healthy environment where people can come in, visit your capital, it's yours, and be safe at the same time and not have to worry about this. This is one of those things where a lot of people are trying to say free speech. if we all in the Senate and in the House stood up and start hurling threats at one another while we're on the Senate floor or on the House floor, that is a dysfunctional legislation. That's not who we are. That's not who we aspire to be. Now, Senator Boquist, as I mentioned, the inquiry is ongoing, but we did offer some restrictions on him entering and exiting the building. To not do anything would put us up for some type of litigation denying a safe workplace. My preference, if you go back and look at what I said on Otis, is he would volunteer to stay out of the building while the investigation is ongoing. That's not what he wants to do. He wants to do something different. But we had to take an action. Now, the people that elected him could do a recall. I don't think so. But if they choose, they could. My concern is that it is a safe work environment. So what we did was we all voted, and to include, there's 4 of us, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and we came to well, I was reluctant, but there was nothing else I can do. My motion got shot down, which was to keep him out of the building. But he is supposed to give a 12-hour notice that he intends to visit the Capitol, which will allow time for OSP to add additional troopers in the building, throughout the building. So, yes, yes, it will cost some money, and it's unfortunate. But we'll have to see how everything plays out. The thing about it is that once we get to the end of this, our challenge is to be how we're going to take this to the full Senate, because the full Senate will have to vote on any type of resolution on how we move forward. Right now, if you see how the Republicans are responding, that's going to be a difficult dive. So we are going to need you to make sure that you don't let disinformation come out, because what they're trying to do is trying to say that it was free speech on the Senate floor, and he apologized. Now, had I got up and threatened someone, I think that the Republicans would have burned the building down to get me out of there. So we got to remember that and stay focused.
I hope you appreciate the tough job that James has, along with Floyd Przansky, who chairs the committee that has to deal with this. Couldn't ask for better people dealing with it from my perspective. Here's the problem. The problem is that the Oregon Constitution, much like the U.S. Constitution, grants exclusive protection for legislators on the floor. We cannot be challenged legally for anything we say on the floor. Now, on Boquist's side, he also made these comments outside of the chamber and outside of the media, so that's a different thing. But here's the deal. The 90 legislators technically are not employees. We're 90 sovereigns. We owe our responsibilities and our position to the people who elected us, and only the people can take us out of those positions. The role that the legislature has, it'll be the Senate in this case, because only the House doesn't act on this. The Senate, if they come back with a recommendation, they being the Conduct Committee, they'll make a recommendation to the full Senate, and the Senate has really 2 options. We can vote to censure him, which is just a public rebuke, saying, don't do that again, or we can vote not to seat him or expel him from the Senate. Now, the irony of that one is we can expel him, but that doesn't mean he's no longer a senator, necessarily. Only the people who elected him can remove him, and that's by recall. So we've never ran into this before in my understanding in Oregon history, but that's the issue that's faced there. And keep in mind, in order to take either of those 2 actions, it takes 2/3 of the senators to vote positive on it. which means it has to be a bipartisan issue. So it's a very thorny and tough issue to deal with. And we've been talking a lot in the last year about it as a workplace and a tough workplace. And we have a problem because, as I said, you have 90 sovereign legislators, but we have a whole bunch of people who work there either for us as legislators, directly our staffs, or the staff in the building. And it's a difficult situation that the laws are just really not very well protected. And according to the Constitution, and the courts have ruled on this, only the legislature can, in each house, can define its rules. The courts will not intervene in that. So it's tough. You've seen a lot of acrimony early on, complaining about, with another senator who left, complaining about the presiding officers not taking the appropriate action. The presiding officers have no authority to take any action. Only the body as a whole can take an action. So it's a very odd situation, you know, as employers, many of you there, that you do it differently in a business, but that's not the same as the legislature, so it's really hard to deal with.
So I want to just take a second to address the second part of that question, which is what to do about the MIA senators. And I'm going to offer a gentle correction that it's AWOL senators. But so first, I just want to make sure everyone sort of knows what happened. So and the basic facts of the situation. So in the Oregon legislature, in the House and the Senate, we require 2/3 of the legislators in each legislators to be present to conduct any business at all. So voting on anything, we can't vote on anything on the House floor or the Senate floor. We can't even, what we call, advance the calendar, you know, read bills and introduce bills unless there are 2/3 of the folks there. In the Oregon Senate, we have 18 Democrats of 30 positions, so 20 would be 2/3. In most states, I actually contacted the national organization that handles state legislatures, and in most states, a simple majority is the quorum requirement. We're one of only 4 states that has a 2/3 quorum requirement. And in 43 states, it's a simple majority, and in the U.S. Congress, it's a simple majority. So we're an outlier. And someone told me that it's because our state constitution, the first draft of it was basically lifted straight from Indiana. So Indiana, Texas, and Tennessee are the 4 states that have it. So anyway, historical fact. There have been walkouts in the past. What's different about this time is that now we have constitutionally limited time limits on our sessions. So it's 100 and, how many days? 80, 50? 60. Okay. So we had to adjourn by midnight on June 30th. So the second walkout, and at midnight on June 30th, any bill that hasn't passed has died. Any budget bills, anything, any policy bills, anything like that. So when they walked out the second time, it really put the entirety of all the bills that were left on the table, more than 100, plus the budgets, which we hadn't passed yet, in jeopardy. And the budget is our one constitutional requirement as the state legislature. We have to pass the budget for the next 2 years. So I've seen a lot of comparison to past walkouts, and the reality is this was an entirely different game because it was essentially putting the basic functioning of our democracy as a negotiating chip at the bargaining table. And so that was 130 some odd bills, Rep. Nathanson says. And it was really important things. I can go through the list, but it was really important things on the table. And personally that was hard for most of us because, this is sort of the fundamentals of our democracy, right? If a small number of people can essentially hold our democracy hostage, to me, that doesn't really bode well. So what to do about that? I think we're starting to have those conversations now about whether there is anything to be done, but I'll be frank, our Constitution assumes that our elected leaders show up to work. Our Constitution was written at a time where it sort of assumed honor. And so, to be blunt, and so we don't have the tools constitutionally to really address this. There are a number of options. So the 2/3 quorum requirement, someone, I went through, when this was happening, my husband said, oh, why don't you impeach them? Why don't you censure them? He went through these whole questions, and it was a great sort of test case for me of like what people were saying. Why don't you change the quorum requirements? Well, we could do that, but it's in the Constitution. And so that would require a ballot measure. The people have to vote. Anytime we amend the Constitution, the people have to vote on it. So you could, a group of citizens could propose that we reduce the quorum requirements. We could have a requirement that says if there are a certain number of unexcused absences, like the Senate is unable to convene because we don't have a quorum, that the session is extended, 1 day for every day that happens. That would also take a constitutional amendment. You could have a constitutional amendment that would say that if you are unexcused, you don't get paid. Actually, that might not require a constitutional amendment. So there are tools that we can sort of take action going forward, but a lot of them would require changes to our Constitution, which is not easy to do. The voters tend to be very hesitant, rightfully so, about changing the Constitution. So we are having those conversations about if there are tools and changes that we can keep, recognizing this new reality that we are in, but know that it will be challenging.
Okay. What do you,
I think so. I heard from the audience make the Senate 2/3 Democrats. So anyway, that's up to the voters.
what do you plan to do next session to protect Oregonians from gun violence? What do you plan to do next session to protect Oregonians from gun violence?
Okay, looks like I'm up again. We got to get some questions down on that end down there. Everybody's just sitting back and waiting. As a former police officer that know a little bit something about guns and a veteran of the United States Army for 24 years, I understand. We took a hard hit the first time that my Senate colleagues walked out. We were not a part of the negotiation process to get them back, and part of that was a comprehensive gun reform bill that was out there, Senate Bill 978. One of the parts of that bill I had was safe gun storage. If you look at the news every night, almost seemingly every hour, you read a report or hear a child, a toddler, got a hold of a firearm and shot and killed another child, toddler, or even a parent. These bills are not to take away anybody's Second Amendment rights. This is the thing that we always encounter when you're talking about how do we protect people from senseless gun violence. I know a lot of people that are gun collectors that have guns, and there is no way that we are, I even suggest that we're going to take anybody's guns away. That is a cry that some of these extreme groups look to incite people. This is this thing called, this phrase called gaslighting, where you know something is true, they try to convince you that it's not true, even though the evidence is right there in your face. So what we're trying to do is make sure that responsible gun owners, which most of the ones I know are, probably the ones you know. I have a friend that owns a tank. He keeps that tank locked up. Nobody wants to see a tank rolling down the road. Yeah. So these bills, do we want anybody to be able to walk in the store and just get a firearm and walk around in the school? Here's the problem that we have in the state capitol. I'm going to address this one specifically as to what's going on. In the state capitol, you can walk in with your firearms. Yeah. So here is the deal. We've got legislators that are there. We have staff members there. We have people in the building that's working. What type of environment? Is that a safe or unsafe environment for some? I think that those are questions. So There was a bill that Senator Janet Verdict had put forward that will prohibit the carry of firearms in the Capitol, as they do in the courts, as they do in police stations, as they do in county corrections, as they do in penitentiaries, as they do in Washington, D.C. Nothing different. And if you recall, the last time there was a shooting at one of our middle schools in Bethel, really heartbreaking. But why would you want to go to an elementary or middle school packing heat? What is the purpose of that? I think that responsible firearms, they would not do it. My opinion, I would not do it. So what we're planning on doing, I'm going to bring my safe gun storage bill back. It's coming back. And we'll continue to work to make sure that everyone here, the argument is that everyone is talking about protection of their Second Amendment rights. My question is, those that don't want guns, who's speaking up for them? Well, I am.
The issue of carrying guns in the state capitol is not theoretical. Guns are in the state capitol, and a couple of years ago, outside my office, with a state trooper present, walking with me, I was walking toward my office, I was in the hallway, and in front of my office, walking past my office, were two citizens with AR-15s. I asked the state trooper, after they got well past me, and I was trying to stay calm. As you can tell, I'm not even calm right now, following Senator Manning. I asked the state trooper, can you tell whether those were loaded? And he said, no, ma'am, I can't. We can't make assumptions. So I wanted to tell you, I'm there ready to do business. I'm ready to vote on bills that have to do with gun safety, protecting children, protecting citizens, protecting public buildings, and so forth. Here's a bunch of more bills. First of all, we did pass a bill, I believe it was House Bill 2013, protecting domestic violence victims from gun violence. We passed one. There are a lot of other bills that were under consideration in addition to Senator Manning's bill, and there was a similar bill on the House side. It was House Bill 2505. In addition to those, we also had the public building preemption exemption, the ghost gun regulations bill, the unlawful storage of a firearm bill, and the age of purchase regulations bill. There they were. We didn't vote on them this time. I'm ready to vote on them when they come to us in the future.
I'm going to give this one to the representatives at the end. Questions on investments in Lane County from several budget bills. Can folks highlight what they were? What kind of investments in Lane County occurred?
That's right up his alley.
Well, we made several investments across the state, and those come out of the Capital Construction Subcommittee, where we take up all the bonding for the whole state. And quite frankly, we really do our very best to distribute projects based on the importance it is in particular communities and spread those out across the state. We in the past have done a lot of stuff in Lane County. I think last session we did the Civic Stadium was one. This session, you see the YMCA sitting up front. We got $15 million to go towards the YMCA here in Eugene. I know a lot of people were I got a little bit of pushback on that, very little, but a little bit of pushback because it's a religious organization. But you know, the Y serves the community. They don't ask me whether I'm an atheist or whether I'm a Catholic or anything like that. If I wanted to go there, I learned how to swim there, and believe it or not, in the late 50s. So they need a new building, and it serves the community. It's really a great project. So happy to be able to to help support that with my colleagues that are on Ways and Means and the whole delegation really supporting that. I just happened to be in the right spot to really push it across the line. One of the ones I want to speak about, though, that's probably more even important to our community is we need a new courthouse. We can't even deliver justice properly without the facilities to do it in, and we don't have it right now. That courthouse is crumbling. We've got leaky pipes. Won't tell you what kind of pipes are leaking. You just don't want to know. You know, and the Supreme Court justices that, you know, they go through and they try to prioritize what courthouses have the most need. Well, guess what? Right now, Lane County's courthouse has the most need. We set aside $86 million. I had to struggle to do that. We put it up there, but as you probably know, the community did not vote in favor of supporting the courthouse. And so that $86 million, I got them to hold on to it till the next election cycle. And I'm urging our county to do some value engineering and come back with another proposal that maybe the community can support. So critical that we get this done, because it's just not about the sheriff's office or the county commissioner's office or anything about this. This is about justice. This is about having the people having defense, people being able to get a timely trial. Those sorts of things are so important, and we've got that money set aside, but it's only to the end of the next biennium, which is out there. This needs to happen in 2020, so we really need community support for that. There's lots of other projects that came in, the Cottage Grove Theater, the Leeburg Hatchery. We also got that extended a little bit. And that's a battle, and it was controversial. But we just we have the same sort of scenarios across the whole state in every community. Communities have important projects. It's important to support those projects. They not only provide jobs, but those projects are usually geared towards serving the community, serving a benefit to the community. So these are really important items, and I really look forward to the new YMCA, because it's like 100 years old or something. I don't know. I mean, if I learned how to swim there, it's got to be old. So they need that. So really happy to do that. Plus, we have some transportation projects that are ongoing as well, that are also very important. So John has one.
Oh. So in addition, we were successful securing $3 million to assist St. Vincent de Paul and Springfield to build a new manufactured housing park. So what we know from affordable housing is manufactured housing is one of the most affordable housing that's available for people, but we haven't constructed new parks in this state, let alone in this area, for years and years and years, and it's been very difficult, and we're losing many of the parks we have, and so there's a real need. And so we were successful in working with St. Vincent de Paul and people in the manufactured housing industry, getting the state to do a grant that's going to be used to help construct this part and demonstrate that both we can do it in a manner in which is cost-effective long-term, but create some real high-quality housing at an affordable price for people, and so I'm very pleased that we secured that.
Thank you, Representative Holdy, for talking about the courthouse. It's the sewage pipes. I'll say it. That are rusting through. So we're going to do one last question, and then we'll do a 1 to 2 minute wrap up after that. Per person, yeah. If a bill like 3063, vaccine exemptions, resurfaces in February, would you be supportive of a statewide notification being sent to the 31,000 families currently relying on their legally protected exemptions so they know this right is about to disappear?
It's the vaccine bill.
Yeah.
So for those who don't know, 3063 was the bill we took up this session about vaccination exemptions. So the proposal would have been so right now there's medical exemptions and there's non-medical exemptions. The proposal in that bill would have been to say, basically to eliminate non-medical exemptions to go to school. So kids basically have to get vaccinated to go to school unless they have a medical exemption. And it made some changes to the medical exemption process that would have made that a little bit easier to get, I would say. So that bill died in May when, in the first Republican walkout. And so I would say there hasn't really been, we've only been out of session a week. I don't really know if that bill is going to come back in the short session. For me, I will just say personally that I would be supportive of having it if it was limited to measles only, because measles is the health crisis we're trying to deal with right now, as opposed to all of the conditions that are that were listed in that bill. So that it's obviously a controversial topic that was a lot of debate and discussion in the legislature this year. So the notification, I would need to. That's a pretty technical question in terms of the ability to get the names of the people who are using those exemptions and medical data in terms of HIPAA. So I'm not even sure if that would be possible to do that, but I think it would. Yeah, I think it would probably violate privacy in some way, as Rep. Nathanson says. But I'll just say there hasn't been any conversation about whether that bill is going to come back. So.
Okay, we'll do a 1 to 2 minute wrap up, and perhaps you can incorporate this. Why you're speaking is what is the best way to hear from you mid-session. Since we started at this, what is the best way to hear from you? It says mid-session, but maybe out of session, in between. Yeah, in the interim. And since we started on this end, we'll start.
I turned it on. Thank you all for attending tonight. First, the best way to reach me or contact me when I'm out of session is the same way when I'm in session, either email or my phone at the Capitol. My staff, Andrew Hickerson, works year-round. He'll answer the phone. He'll get back to you if it's an email. If we need to set up meetings, I do a lot of meetings in district because I'd rather spend time down here than I would up there. But it's the same process. And many of you in this room have my cell number, so I know some of you call me on my cell, which is all right too. Whatever it is, I'm your elected representative for those that live in Springfield or the state, and I'm open for those kind of conversations. I just have a couple of comments. One, this process that we have to go through from a standpoint of how we do legislation, there's a difference in the Senate and the House, and this is not a criticism of the Senate, but there's a difference. I can tell you, when you talk about gun legislation, we were ready in the House to pass substantial changes to gun regulations and that, but we knew the path in the Senate was a torturous one and may not get there. And there was other important things that we wanted to be able to get out of the Senate. That's just the way the process works. You got to come back this multiple times to do that. But it works the same way for the Senate coming over to the House, but people need to understand there's two distinct chambers, and at times we don't agree. For me, the biggest unfinished business and the biggest crisis is climate change, and we have to do something about it. I don't know, I don't have the magic answer, but I know we have to get policies in place that we can start implementing so we can learn more about what's working or not, and we've got to do it quickly. And so from my standpoint, whether it's a short session, whether it's work groups in between in the short session, whatever it is, we, the legislature, along with the governor, have got to get our act together and find a way in this state to really start addressing this issue to help our citizens adapt and the change that is already occurring.
Yeah, I would agree with John. The best way to engage with me is an email. Let me rephrase that. It's repeated emails. So, we do get a lot of inquiries, a lot of contact, and so if you don't hear back from our office or from my office within a week or so, you should send another email and say, hey, I sent you an email. It literally is difficult to get all that done, but email is really the best. Or you can leave a message at the state capitol as well. And I'm going to agree with John. Climate change is really, the thing that needs to be addressed. And just to go back a little bit, we need to educate the forestry industry a little bit. There are great opportunities for jobs in rural Oregon included in our House Bill 2020 that if they weren't receiving so much misinformation about what was going to happen to them and what was going to happen to their jobs and those sorts of things, the bill would have had an easier pathway. We have to keep working on the forestry industry because our forests have the potential of, if they're managed correctly, of sequestering the carbon, to so much degree that we can help the planet, not just Oregon. And so that's really a big thing, but it's a changing culture that rural Oregon has to accept. And and going along that line, as long as we have this democratic roadblock in front of us, and I mean a roadblock to our democratic institution where the minority can hold us hostage through quorum requirements or through obstruction of the process, and it saddens me to see that sort of thing happen. On the House side, we've had challenges all session whilst the minority was requiring us to read the entire bills on the floor. When you have an 80-page bill, that takes a while. When you have a 120-page bill, it takes even longer. Hours, literally, to get your work done. It was a good idea in the 1800s to read the bill on the floor. But today, when people have access to it days ahead of time, and the entire language of the bill, that's another one of those constitutional problems we have that are being used to obstruct our process. And so, we really do need to figure out how to bridge that gap and not let the democratic institution be undermined. It really does sadden me. And we did pretty well on the House side. We were able to work with our Republicans, though they put us through some of those same things. They never left the building on us. We did. It does take working across the aisle quite a bit, but sometimes there's just no way to prevent it when it's controversial, as cap and trade was. They could run away with the process. So that's going to have to go to the voters someday.
I want to start with disappointments and end with hope. Sure, not being able to develop a bill to address climate change that could pass through both chambers of the Oregon legislature was a huge disappointment. There were other disappointments for me. The polystyrene ban, we thought we had it, we didn't. Safe storage for guns. I tried personally for additional funding for CASA, court-appointed special advocates. We didn't get additional funding, we're helping them maintain it. I wanted the additional funding. Urban search and rescue. I was trying to get that for the Eugene Springfield fire and actually for a service that they provide for the whole state, if they could. I was trying to get funding for USAR, didn't get that. I had a very important bill that was going to help Looking Glass and Scar Jasper Mountain. You may know of those programs. We didn't get that bill passed either. This was a building that was full of noise, anxiety, stress. Stress coming from outside the building and stress in the end coming from inside our own building. Despite that, I want to tell you something about how the Oregon legislature, at least until the last couple of weeks, really was different than Washington, D.C. Partisanship is not, or has not been, until the last couple of weeks, the way we do business. The House voted on nearly 800 bills. Of those, only 8% were partisan. That is where fewer than 5 Republicans voted with Democrats to pass a bill. That means that 92% of what we passed was bipartisan, with at least 5 Republicans voting with Democrats. And in my committee, I worked with a Democrat vice chair and a Republican vice chair very closely all the time to keep conversation and communication going. About 60 bills passed out of our committee. Of those, 30 were legislators' bills. Of those 30 bills, if anyone tells you the Democrats don't let Republicans pass bills, that is also not correct, because in my committee, for example, it's true that the chief sponsor was a Democrat for 19 bills. 9 of those bills were bipartisan, and 3 had only a Republican as chief sponsor, and those passed out of my committee as well. So we go for a lack of partisanship and what is in the best interest of the state of Oregon. So still, there were wins. There were wins for all of us, not only Eugene, Springfield, and Lane County, but for the state of Oregon. Remember, oil train safety, we did close a gun safety loophole, single-use plastic bags and plastic straws, fracking, paid family leave, national popular vote, and finally the big investment in education, the Student Success Act. It was a great legislative session, if you can just put that the last 2 weeks out of your mind. It was a great session. I love working with this team, and I hope to keep working with you for the rest of the sessions.
So I'll just add to the email, phone, but also you should sign up for our email lists, which you can do on all of our official sites on the Oregon Legislature website. And follow us on social media and all of that. I'm pretty active on Facebook and Twitter. And so if you were on my email list, you would know that in my end of session wrap up, I sent out a list of about 50 bills that I thought were sort of the most interesting, most important in the legislative session. We've talked about half of those bills tonight. So I'm going to do the speed read of the ones that we didn't talk about. Really quickly, education, higher education affordability. We expanded the Oregon Opportunity Grant to additional 2,500 students. We implemented an educational savings tax credit, which is a refundable tax credit for contributing to 529 or ABLE plans. We passed tuition equity for graduate students, which will allow we have tuition equity for undocumented immigrants for undergrad. Now we have it for graduate students. We passed 80s Act, which requires school districts to adopt comprehensive suicide prevention plans. Senate Bill 963, which addresses disruptive learning in K-12 classrooms. On healthcare, we passed 60 days advance notice for prescription drug price increases and a prescription drug take-back program, which is a tool to help combat the opioid epidemic. And 3076, which ensures nonprofit hospitals are providing an appropriate level of charity care to low-income patients in the community, which is a big deal. Worker protections, which we haven't talked about at all. This is Rep. Holvey and I's sort of favorite topic. Senate Bill 726, which strengthens workplace harassment laws. 2 bills which expand workplace protections for pregnant and nursing mothers. House Bill 2016, which protects public employee collective bargaining rights. House Bill 3193, which is one of my personal bills I worked on for over a year to address wage theft in the construction industry. Children and families. So we passed a statewide voluntary nurse home visiting program to support families with newborns. So every newborn now, if you want a nurse to visit your home and check in, you can have that. It's not mandatory. If you want it, you can have that. Yeah, okay. Not right this second. It'll take a little bit to implement that program. Sorry. If you're pregnant, sorry, wait a couple months. So we expanded the earned income tax credit to support working families. We added funding to add about 350 additional child welfare caseworkers to our system and passed several bills to make improvements in the process and policy in child welfare. We very briefly mentioned like historic reforms to Measure 11 and mandatory minimum sentences for juveniles, but that was a major bill. In the justice system area. We made it easier to expunge past marijuana convictions. In any other session, death penalty reform, we would have talked about that, but we passed a bill that severely curtailed the death penalty in Oregon. Senate Bill 577, which strengthens our hate crime laws. House Bill 2625, research and data collection on missing and murdered Indigenous women. We made an additional $20 million investment in funding for our criminal defense system, which is woefully underfunded and is practically unconstitutional. In government and elections, we passed our capital culture reforms. We passed the Oregon Voting Rights Act, which will help school boards, ensure school boards are more representative of the communities they serve. One of my other bills strengthened the period of time legislators must wait to become paid lobbyists after they leave the legislature. Nancy mentioned the moratorium on fracking, and we also banned offshore drilling. And we passed the Oregon Environmental Protection Act, which protects against federal rollbacks of environmental policies. And finally, in immigrant and refugee communities, we passed driver's licenses for all. The Welcoming Refugees Act, which provides funding for refugee resettlement services, and $2 million in funding for immigrant legal defense services. So I went over time. I've got the red folder. In addition to all that great stuff and the unfinished business, I just want to flag additional piece of unfinished business is pesticide regulation. So that was one of my unfinished business on that list. And so I'll just close by saying we have a great team up here from Eugene Springfield. We work together to make sure that the local priorities are addressed in the legislature. We meet on a regular basis to make sure we're tracking the policy and the budget asks from our district. Rep. Wilde couldn't be here. He's actually on service. He's in the Guard, and so he's doing his active duty service right now. And then Senator Przanski couldn't be here as well. But thank you all so much for coming.
It's a tradition in the House to talk a lot, and a lot, and a lot. We don't do that as much in the Senate side. We sent 760 bills to the governor for her signature, and I think Julie just rattled through most of them. Sure. I believe that this is probably will go down as one of the most successful sessions in Oregon's history, along with the session in 1973 and one in the middle 2000s. We got a lot done, and a lot that you should be proud of. We're proud of it anyway. Best way to keep in touch with me is, as the others said, the Oregon legislative site. You don't have to remember the thing. All you got to do is go onto that and click on our name, and you can send an email. It's very easy. Celine Swenson-Harris is my staff person. She monitors the phone on a daily basis as well as the email, and so send us either call or that, and we'll get back to you very quickly. Try to anyway. For me, the things that I'm going to keep working on during the interim, I've been one of the co-sponsors of the Clean Jobs Act since I came back to the legislature in 2011 and don't intend to let up now. There are many other ways. We'll keep working on that, but in the meantime, I'm going to try other things as well. And healthcare. I continue to focus on that, be working with James and all the rest of the group on making sure that task force finishes up and gives us a guide by 2021 session that we can make that work. So a lot of good work, and I'm going to pass the torch.
Thank you. You just kind of reminded me that a wise man once said, absolutely nothing, but I will take this opportunity, though, to say thank you to each and every one of you for sharing some of your time with us this evening, because it's really important. I want to know what's on your mind, what you're thinking about. To contact me, just like everyone else, Olis, or you can send me, my Gmail is real simple. It's njamesmanning@gmail.com. Real easy. I'll get back with you, although I do have a number of people that call in or send me emails wanting specific answers to specific issues. And that takes a lot of time when you get a lot of people that's doing that. And I try to get through it as best I can. I'm not that good at it, obviously, but I will continue to work on it. And again, as it was said before, if you send me an email, you don't get a reply, send it again. My Lawanda is my chief of staff, and she monitors the phone actually almost 24 hours a day. I had to tell her to get off the computer. And she does come to me with questions, but what I would prefer to do is that I would like to meet at coffees. sit down, or maybe come to your home where you have neighbors. I want to dispel myths about what's going on. All too often, we live in the heat of the moment. Sound bites, what we heard from someone else. I'm hoping tonight that everyone will be able to walk away with hearing, actually knowing what we actually do in the legislation. And by the way, I started off this session chief sponsoring over 45 bills by itself, and I co-sponsored an additional 100 bills. A lot of my bills were with my Republican senator colleagues. Alan Olson, for example, did a bill with him as a chief sponsor. Bill Hansel did a chief sponsor bill with him. And there are a few others. So the rate of participation in the House is the same as in the Senate, about 98%. So we do a lot of work together. And again, I want to thank you. And I also want to, again, thank my colleague. I went over this time on purpose because I didn't get a chance to do it the last time. Thank you.